Back to last year, of course, the Chiefs did not get the bye, and the Dolphins came into town. This, to me, projects as a more interesting game than that. I think the reason I say that is, let's be clear, any team that won last weekend and is coming off a win is going to feel like a team that can come in and beat the Chiefs. But what I find more interesting about this particular team is I think their biggest strength is probably their front and garnering pressure on the opposing quarterback. And not to say that if the Chiefs decide to go with Tooney and Caliendo and that being their best line, they can counteract that. But I think we can all agree that the team's greatest weakness right now would be sometimes the protection, and specifically the protection at the tackle positions. And so I don't love that aspect of it necessarily. I still think the Chiefs are the better team. Of course, I'm going to predict them to win this game. I just think they have more firepower, and I'm sure we'll get to that as the show goes on. But if you're looking for a reason that this could be an intriguing game and maybe a little too close for comfort, I think it's that.
Well, it was, I think for the most part, too, a very uneventful wild card weekend, right? There were a lot of blowouts, and you just talked a little bit about the Chargers and the Texans, but let's start things with the Bills. They take on Denver. I know we had discussed that game a little bit, the big spread in that one. We felt like Denver was going to be able to hang with Buffalo.
Man, that was dumb.
That pass rush. I mean, there were reasons to believe maybe that Denver could maybe sneak up on Buffalo, but I've always believed this. The more that a true underdog gets talked about as the underdog in a game, they kind of get blasted when kind of the rubber meets the road, if you will. I think everybody had talked themselves into that being the game where the spread was too big, Buffalo was going to come out a little bit sluggish, Denver was better than maybe people thought. And the Bills heard all that noise because after falling behind 7-0, they respond with 31 unanswered points. Your takeaways from that game?
Yeah, I mean, I had said on a few shows on A10, including this one, that I thought that game was going to be interesting. I felt really good from a betting angle of taking the points for Denver. I thought that the way that it played out, Denver came out firing, and you saw them go down the field, and they start the game with this 43-yard touchdown pass to Franklin, and I'm like, okay, they're going to have to score if they're going to play with Buffalo, and here they're proving that they can. And then as the game went on, it seemed like rather than running and gunning, which got them that really early lead in the first place, they were like, okay, we're going to run on every first and second down. And when, to me, the strength of their team is not the running back, because the running back changes every week for them. I'm just surprised they went away from Bo Nix and maybe this pass-first type of offense. It just wasn't enough. And then as it usually goes when a 7 is playing a 2 or a team that is an underdog by multiple scores, just quicksand happened to them. And it's really, really tough in the NFL if you're a rookie quarterback and the quicksand begins. And, everyone talks about how the playoffs, everything speeds up. Bo Nix will probably be better in his second playoff performance. His name's not Justin Herbert, who has completely fallen off, apparently, in the postseason. But to me, it just was too much to overcome. And I think Buffalo, we knew what they could do offensively, but I also thought that Denver deserved more credit offensively, and I think they made a stand in themselves of, we limited this team who has been able to score points this year. It's not your uncle's Denver Broncos, but we were able to hold them to 7 points, and other than that first drive, it really was never a question once you got into that second quarter, so Buffalo moves on.
Now, unlike that Denver-Buffalo game, where at least for 15 minutes, we thought the Broncos were going to be able to hang around, the Ravens and Steelers game really didn't go the way that I had thought either. I didn't think Pittsburgh was anywhere close to where Baltimore was, but you factor in the divisional matchups, and when you're facing a team a third time, there's a lot out there in the open. There's a lot of film. There's a lot to scout, and they're familiar with each other. But that game was never close at any point. Baltimore got out early. Their defense was great. Pittsburgh looked like they were scared. They had scared play calling. Russell Wilson wasn't very good. Yeah, there was a moment, I think, where Pittsburgh in the second half was down 2 scores, had the ball. There was an opportunity. The door wasn't completely shut. but Baltimore slammed it pretty quickly and was able to handle Pittsburgh with ease. Is that the way you thought that game was going, just because of the sheer talent and the way that Pittsburgh clearly wasn't that focused on slowing down the legs of Lamar Jackson? Or was that about how you expected it to go?
Yeah, I similar to the Denver game, but maybe not as much, and I guess it should have been because this was only a 2-touchdown game. I thought Pittsburgh, because of the nature of the division, would hang around a little bit better than they did. They figured something out in the second half, but they made a critical mistake in that first half when they called a timeout late in that second frame. I think it was on second down, and Baltimore ends up converting, and it was just insurmountable. By the time they got in the locker room to sort of figure it out, it was already 21-0, and it's really tough to come back even against a division opponent in the playoffs who you know well in that type of situation, especially when you think about the quarterbacks. Like Russell Wilson, as we grew up with him, for me it was more like the high school and college days watching Russell Wilson. He was a really entertaining guy to watch when he was younger. But this version is probably not the capable quarterback that's going to get you through the Super Bowl. And I think we saw that on display in this game. Lamar Jackson is just too much for an opposing team that doesn't have the quarterback. If you look at who's left in this stance, you got C.J. Stroud and Patrick Mahomes, of course. You have Jaden Daniels, and he's going up against Jared Goff, who has really developed into one of the better quarterbacks in the league. Matt Stafford versus Jalen Hurts. Lamar Jackson versus Josh Allen, of course. There is some theme here. Sam Darnold is not moving on. Russell Wilson is not moving on. And I think in the playoffs, especially when your season is on the line, that becomes so important. And Russ is just not there anymore. And I think we saw that early in that game.
Yeah, Russell Wilson, I think, had proved a little bit that he was a competent quarterback mid-part of the season when he took over Justin Fields. But that magic quickly ran out as the Steelers lost 5 in a row to close out the season, lost the Final 4 in the regular season, and then the 1 in the postseason. They wrap up at 10-8.
And now you suddenly have questions about Mike Tomlin and whether they trade him and whatnot. Very dissatisfied fans. Reminds me a little bit of when Kansas City was in that Alex Smith part of this franchise, where you were knocking on the door in terms of a playoff win or two, and then all of a sudden it became a regular thing where they would get knocked out in that divisional round. And I think Pittsburgh has had enough. At a certain point, it's fun to make the playoffs, but you need to see some kind of success. And I wonder where that goes, because I like Mike Tomlin, but similar to Andy Reid in a sense, it got to a point in that first stop where I think a change of scenery was necessary and could give you new juice on what is your head coaching career. And I'd be intrigued to see if there is a movement with Tomlin. I know that Pittsburgh has said we're sticking with him, but we've seen plenty of speak at the podium that turns differently as time goes on. So I am curious to see what happens once next season starts.
The last game I do want to get to, and I know we already touched on it briefly to open up the show, but Houston and the Chargers. That felt like the sexy pick of the wild card weekend. That the Chargers, they were the lower seed, they're on the road, but they were just flat out playing better football than Houston, and they were far healthier than Houston. The Chargers had the number 1 scoring defense. They didn't turn the ball over. But of course, in this game, as has just become common with the Chargers, they choke it away. I don't really want to say that a 6-0 lead is considered choking it away, but when you were picked by a lot of people, I think it was Rex Ryan said it was a bye week for the Chargers because the Texans were so banged up and they just weren't the same team they once were. I think this was a Houston team that heard all of that noise. We heard it in the postgame a little bit. But that's why it felt like picking the Chargers in that spot just was dangerous because, like we said with Denver, they felt like that team to cover the spread. The more you bring attention to it, it feels like the lesser likely it's going to happen. I know I didn't use those words correctly.
Right.
But in the Chargers game, everybody's picking the Chargers. And the more public that became, the less likely it was that they were to win. And then the Texans win 32-12. They now advance to take on Kansas City. I know that's not what everybody expected to happen, especially not Justin Herbert having more interceptions in that game than he did all of the regular season.
Yeah, I think we see it in Kansas City with Andy Reid. Andy Reid is notorious for not wanting to provide any additional motivation. And I'm not saying that talk within the media can impact a game to a significant point where more times than not, the better team is not going to win. I think largely it comes between the X's and O's and between the white lines. But there is an aspect of, well, look at all these people picking against us. And I do think the Texans probably knew that going in. And quite obviously, like C.J. Stroud just outperformed Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert now has had these 2 games in the playoffs where he looks like a pretty good quarterback, certainly a top 10 quarterback. I know that there have been some people out there that would say he would be knocking on the door at that top 5, but you can't be that if you're going to have your worst performances in the postseason. I think we saw that with Justin Herbert. I know we're not going to really dive into the NFC side on this show, but that's what's tough about Sam Darnold now. Sam Darnold has a spectacular year, and he's in line for all this money and some kind of extension, if not signing somewhere else for a big mega deal. And now there's like so many questions because you need to perform in the playoffs. And I think we just saw Justin Herbert after having, like I said, maybe not a great year, but a good year, really good with the football, not turning it over. He has 4 turnovers in this game, and a big part of that was the front. I mean, that Texans front, and this is pertinent for the Chiefs game, was relentless. And, there has to be an answer there, be it protecting the quarterback, be it giving him help, or, again, like what we saw with Kansas City down the stretch, getting rid of the football quickly.
Now, the big news of today, of course, with the Chiefs speaking at the podium, we heard from Patrick Mahomes, Andy Reid, multiple other players as well. The health status of this team. We knew the long layoff was going to do them wonders, but now one guy has snuck back into that conversation in Jaylen Watson, who we thought after that injury in San Francisco, that was going to sideline him the rest of the year. But he's been rehabbing, he's been working hard, he's been practicing a little bit, and from the sound of it, per Andy Reid today, it's not completely out of the question that we could see him out on the field this Saturday. Where are you at when it comes to Jaylen Watson? Do you think that's a bit of a smokescreen of he's playing well, we might use him, but you save him for the next round if you do advance? Or do you feel like number 35 might actually be out there against the Texans' wide receiver room?
A big point that I always look at in covering the Chiefs, and kudos to them, because I feel like not every team does this like the NFL wants you to, or really it's like by NFL bylaws you have to be honest with. But they're incredibly honest with their injury report. Like if they really felt like a certain player was not going to be available, he would be limited on the injury report. That's why I pointed in several of my interviews and stuff talking about this game of Tuesday's big, because if Jaylen Watson is a full participant, then I think that's a really good sign in the right direction that he's going to be able to suit up in some capacity. We got that. He was a full participant in practice on Tuesday. A couple hours earlier, I asked Andy Reid at the podium about Jaylen Watson's chances of playing, and he said, we've been really impressed with where he's at. I still want to see him this week, and maybe it's not a full bevy of snaps, but maybe there is an opportunity to have him in a rotation, and so you're probably looking at a rotation, I would think, of Jaylen Watson, and when he needs it below Joshua Williams, and we know about the other players that can go into that with Keith Taylor, and of course Najee Johnson didn't have the greatest week 18, but I think even if you're able to get, let's call it 50% of the snaps for Jaylen Watson, you're a much, much, much better football team defensively. So I think this is a huge thing for Kansas City. And it's not only Jaylen Watson. I think there were other questions about the status of certain players, Shamari Connor, Chris Jones, Isaiah Pacheco. You wanted to see how Patrick Mahomes was on this injury report. They were all listed, but they were all full participants. The only non-full participant he was limited was Mecole Hardman. More of a reach for him to be back this week, but I think that's okay with how many pass catchers the Chiefs seemingly have right now.
Last thing I want to get to before we go to Ron Kopp, lead analyst of Arrowhead Pride, get his thoughts on the upcoming matchup with Houston. This long layoff, and Houston coming off a 20-point win. They are certainly riding the momentum, but it's not technically the same Texans team they just saw at Arrowhead back on December 21st. Tank Dell no longer with the wide receiver group. It is a depleted wide receiver room. And in that game against the Chargers, they were able to rely on Joe Mixon a lot in that game. But what does this long layoff mean? What does momentum mean for Houston? Because it feels like at this point in time, a lot of people already, sharpieing this game of the Chiefs are going to be moving on. Houston's not going to have the talent. They're not healthy enough. They're at Arrowhead. It's playoff Patrick Mahomes. Is there any concern that things could go drastically wrong because of the layoff, because of the momentum Houston has, or do you not really pay much attention to that because this Chiefs team has had a bye before. They've got a lot of postseason experience, and they face teams with far more momentum than Houston has right now.
Yeah, I'm not worried about that aspect at all. This is what Andy Reid does. He rests his players, and that whole spiel I just gave about the injury report is why. You can make any case about rust. And, okay, let's say for a few plays they are rusty. You take the rust for having a full near 100% team going into this game, because I feel like that gives you the best chance to win. And I think that's what the Chiefs have now. And you look at across the way, and the Texans are dealing with some interesting injuries that, you wonder how it impacts them. The right guard is injured. The backup of the right guard is injured. There is such an advantage to being rested. And I've said this before, and I'll say it one more time. Like, we don't worry about the whole rust factor when it's the opening game. The Chiefs haven't played for 6 months. They've been only in training camp. What are they going to be like? And I know that is the same for the other team. But at the same time, it's always, to me, an advantage for Andy Reid, because he's so good at this thing where he has a fully rested team and he has additional time to prepare. Like, he didn't waste it. I mean, he was open before they even knew it was going to be the Texans. They were scouting all 4 options. So they have such a jump on this game, and that usually plays into the Chiefs' advantage. Now, they get by, knock on the wood if you need to. Next week's a little bit of a different story because now you're in the mix, but I think it's just such an advantage for this week.
We will be asking Ron Kopp about his thoughts, of course, about the Chiefs and Texans, but also that game that Pete just teased, the Ravens and the Bills. Quite the heavyweight showdown at Highmark Stadium in Orchard Park. That is 2 MVP quarterbacks that are about to duel coming up on Sunday night. But let's take our first break of the show. When we come back, Ron Kopp, lead analyst of Arrowhead Pride on Arrowhead Pride Radio and Sports Radio 810 WHB.
While you're sleeping after the game, Arrowhead Pride's lead analyst Ron Kopp is in the lab. Now he joins Arrowhead Pride Radio.
Back here on Arrowhead Pride Radio, which is brought to you by Heartland Financial and Mortgage. Check them out at hfmkc.com. We're now joined on the phone line by Ron Kopp, lead analyst of Arrowhead Pride, as you just heard right there. Ron, what do you make of this matchup with the Houston Texans? Is this the team that Kansas City wanted to draw, or is it a little bit dangerous now after that 20-point beatdown of the L.A. Chargers?
You know, heading into the wild card round, I definitely had the thought that, you know, if an AFC West team were to come into the divisional round, whether it's the Chargers or the Broncos, I do think just with the familiarity those teams have with the Chiefs, those teams kind of forming their teams to beat the Chiefs, I think those are probably the two teams, even though you trust Andy to take care of business in the AFC West like he always does. You know, those are the two teams I thought maybe would give the best upset potential. But, no, I think the Texans are, you know, a team with a really strong defense right now. You saw that in that first game, man. They really got to Herbert and forced some really bad throws and really, you know, were all over the place. But, you know, at the same time, I think you see their offense just struggling a little bit. The Chargers had a chance to put the Texans away in that wild card round, just couldn't at the first part of the game and let it get away from them. So I think the Chiefs are feeling good about this matchup for sure. And then watching Buffalo and Baltimore beat each other up on the other side.
Jack, you know I love a cheap plug. Right now, up at Arrowhead Pride, we just posted it. Ron has his 3 takeaways about the Texans offense from the wild card win. If you want to go and read that, there's some great clips there. But let's reveal 1 and 2, Ron. You noted that the pass game centers around Nico Collins. The Chiefs have to make sure that he's not a problem, but their pass protection is vulnerable. Wonder if you could talk a little bit about those 2 points.
Yeah, well, you've seen it this year with C.J. Stroud. You know, they have names up front on that Texans offensive line. A guy like Laramie Tunsil at left tackle. You know, Titus Howard at left guard has been their right tackle at times in the past. You know, they have decent names up front, but they have really struggled to keep C.J. Stroud protected all this season pretty much. One thing you really notice when you watch them is they really struggle picking up pass rush stunts. One of the sacks Stroud took this last week was just a very easy. The defensive tackle rushes to the outside and the defensive end loops around inside, and the left guard didn't give him a single thought. He let him come right through and into Stroud for a sack. I think the Chiefs are going to really need to get creative up front with their four-man rushes, I should say, to really get pressure without the blitz. I do think you'll see Spags blitz plenty, but this Texans pass protection can be had with just the 4 men up front, and so that's a key thing here with the Chiefs is, you know, having those 4 men up front, you know, get pressure themselves, not necessarily having to rely on the blitz, and not letting C.J. Stroud have too much time, you know, to operate and find guys like Nico Collins, who is a very, very good receiver. I mean, no matter how much attention you have on him, he can get open.
Worth noting here on the Texans front that Shaq Mason missed practice, the right guard, not expected to play against the Chiefs. And his backup, Juice Scruggs, was also out of practice on Tuesday, so that's worth monitoring when it comes to potentially an interior advantage for Kansas City. I want to continue with this defense, Ron. We have noted that Jalen Watson was a full participant on Tuesday, and I want you to just put in perspective what that might mean for the secondary.
Oh, it's huge. It is so big. You know, and this matchup may not be as huge when you think about the Texans' lack of receiving options outside of Nico Collins. You know, we Chiefs fans saw Tank Dell go down in that last game. That was kind of that second option in the Texans' offense. It's Nico Collins and then tight end Dalton Schultz and then a bunch of names. And so having Jalen Watson back, what it does for you is it puts Trent McDuffie back in a position where he can be that all-around playmaker, whether he's playing in the slot and can guard a slot receiver or blitz. You know, McDuffie, you know, before this season when he was used as that primary slot defender, I mean, it's hard to think of many corners that are better at timing up the blitz, accelerating into the backfield, you know, just making an impact on the play, whether he's batting the ball down or getting a sack. McDuffie is so good at those things. When you play at outside cornerback exclusively, you can't be used in those ways and in as many ways to make plays. You know, you can really just be that cover corner for the most part. You know, strip someone after the catch. You can do that, as he has done. He's very good at forcing fumbles. But, no, I think Jalen Watson, the big thing is it just frees up Trent McDuffie to be that true playmaker, that true chess piece in the secondary for Spags. We've seen him have that guy through all his playoff runs, whether it was Tyrann Mathieu before We've seen it with, Jay Reed moving all over the formation, L'Jarius Sneed, obviously. Trent McDuffie is that guy now, and him, Jalen Watson being back in the mix just allows Trent McDuffie to do everything that his skill set allows him to do.
Andy Reid wasn't showing his hand much when it comes to who will be starting at left tackle between DJ Humphries and Joe Thuney. We may not get that answer until very late in the week. What's your gut telling you right now? Are they going to stick with Thuney, or is there a real chance that DJ Humphries is going to be the left tackle and Thuney will go back to left guard for this game on Saturday?
Yeah, I really feel like if you're the Chiefs, you have to value the experience you saw Thuney, play with in the last 3 starts he played at left tackle, in front of Mahomes. The comfort the offense had, the comfort Mahomes had behind him. But I will say it's a very interesting point that when you think about it, this Texans defense has seen this offensive line with Joe Thuney at left tackle. It's not some new wrinkle that they'll be throwing at a team that maybe hadn't, played the Chiefs before they shifted that around. So that is an interesting point to me because, you can maybe give them a different look a little bit if you put Humphries out there at left tackle and Joe Thuney at left guard. This Texans defense, the pass rushers are already gone against Thuney. They maybe already have kind of figured out, how, these are the ways I need to attack him. These are the ways, I need to, be able to get pressure. And you could even say that about Mike Caliendo at left guard as well. Last week you saw that Texans defense really get home. Danico Autry is not even one of their best pass rushers, and he was the one getting home a couple times from that inside position, being a guard. So, yeah, I think I prefer Thuney just because we saw how the offense worked with him, and DJ Humphries, you just haven't seen enough of him in the Chiefs offense and live situations. All that to say, though, I do think there's something to think about here with Thuney already having that experience against the Texans left tackle. That may be the factor here. I could see that maybe, being a difference in why you put Humphries at left tackle and Thuney back at left guard, just to give them another look, something they just saw a month ago. They get to prepare for it again.
Speaking of that game, Week 16, it was a 27-19 win for Kansas City. It really felt like this was the Xavier Worthy-centric game. He was targeted 11 times, ends up with 7 catches for 65 yards and a touchdown. The yardage spread from there to guys like Samaje Perine and Hollywood Brown. DeAndre Hopkins and Travis Kelce also pitched in. But do you anticipate Worthy is the point of focus for the Chiefs, not only in this game but for the playoffs, maybe like a torch passing in a sense to Travis Kelce? Or do you find that Travis Kelce is still going to be that guy just considering it's the postseason?
I think we're setting up Travis pretty well considering all the rest he just got. I think we saw it last year where he was able to turn it on in the postseason. And so I do think Kelce is going to give you another level of impact, maybe in the red zone. I do think Kelce can take it up another level. But when you talk about Xavier Worthy and you talk about the progress he made the last few weeks of the season, in my opinion, it's his individual ascension, obviously, and I do think they need to ride him as a playmaker, getting the ball in his hands quickly. But it's also just the fact that Hollywood Brown is back in this offense and just gives them another speed threat, another playmaker that can take the ball and do something with it quickly. And that's another thing where this Texans defense saw the Chiefs with Hollywood Brown. So I do think there's a few things with this Texans defense that maybe the Chiefs offense could catch another team off guard where they may not, because I do think you saw the Chiefs offense go into playoff mode those last few weeks. And that's why Xavier Worthy was such, a big factor, because you're seeing design plays, getting him the ball in space with good blocking out in front, finding the best ways to make plays with his speed, his special speed, his special acceleration. But I do think it helps him having more options, even like a DeAndre Hopkins who, I think you could see the best of his ability in the Chiefs offense in this postseason. There's just so many other options, and it does lead Worthy as that number one playmaker that you can get the ball in his hands on a large quantity and see if he can score a touchdown or two.
We talked about the protection. We talked about the pass catchers. Let's tie a bow on this with the running back room. I think there is a healthy debate among fans right now of should the Chiefs roll mostly with Kareem Hunt? Should it be Isaiah Pacheco? What would you do in this situation? Who should be that first down back, so to speak, in your opinion, based on what you've seen this year?
Yeah, I've been pretty high on Kareem's vision as a ball carrier, in between the tackles. I really feel like he maximizes runs more so than Isaiah Pacheco does. And that's where I could see Kareem Hunt getting, kind of maybe the lean and the amount of carries he gets. But Pacheco, I do think you can go series by series with them. One guy can have one series, one guy can have the other. But I do think having Kareem as that lead back, can keep Pacheco fresh, and then in that second half when maybe you're wearing down a defense a little bit, the defensive line is maybe a little worn out. If Isaiah Pacheco only has 5 or 6 carries to that point, you're talking about some fresh legs and explosive player. Those are when the big runs can really hurt a defense when, they're just already tired. They're already beat down by Kareem Hunt running through their face all game. That's where I think Isaiah Pacheco really does fit more of that kind of change of pace, big playback where Kareem can maybe keep you, on schedule in terms of an offense, keep you ahead of the sticks a little bit. So I do think I would lean toward Kareem getting a few more carries, but I think you could see them split carries by the end of the game, and Pacheco maybe being the guy that you kind of lean on towards the end of the game to see if you can get some more explosive runs when you really need it down the stretch.
We're talking with Ron Kopp, lead analyst over at Arrowhead Pride. Ron, I'm fascinated to know where you stand when it comes to the Ravens and Bills game. It will be the matchup of the weekend. You got 2 MVP-type quarterbacks in Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Highmark Stadium, cold Buffalo weather. Yet the Ravens are a team that I feel like a lot more people are siding with because of that matchup in the regular season and because it's really unknown if Buffalo's front is going to be able to stop the rushing attack of Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. So where are you siding right now? Do you feel like Buffalo's going to get this one done because they're at home, or will Baltimore go on the road and continue their surge to the AFC Championship game?
Yeah, I do think Baltimore has a really, really strong, advantage in this game when you talk about just their overall running ability, with Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson against the Buffalo defense that I think is definitely a little bit softer up front than you would like to see from a playoff defense. I think they can get moved a little bit, and they can get attacked over the middle, and that's where the Ravens want to play, is really attacking with Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, having obviously Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson to run through the middle and stuff. All that to say, Josh Allen, I think deserved MVP this year. I know the stats probably point towards Lamar Jackson, but when you talk about how he has carried that Buffalo team, a team that if you look at the beginning of the season, I don't think a lot of people maybe thought this was a reload year for them. I think you're seeing why Josh Allen is so special as a quarterback, carrying this team. I do think the Ravens can win that game and will win that game. But I think if you're the Chiefs, you want the Ravens to win that game because I think Josh Allen has the Chiefs' defense's number a little bit. Obviously they played last time without Jalen Watson. That's a huge factor in a potential rematch. But I think you'd rather play Lamar Jackson if you're the Chiefs, and I think that's where it leans right now. But if the Bills do win, it's because Josh Allen is a superhero and carries them on his back. I think that's the only way Buffalo wins, is if Josh Allen just goes superhero mode. All
right, Ron, let's close with going back to Kansas City. Chiefs, Texans, give us a final score and a couple reasons why.
Yeah, I think the Chiefs can control this game and can really take it to the Texans defense, especially when the Texans offense, when you're talking about, the pressure that the Texans have allowed, the interceptions you saw last week, or the turnovers. I should say the Texans committed 3 turnovers last week. I think the Chiefs defense pounces on the opportunity. You see the Chiefs offense do enough to control this game. I'm going to give it 27-17. I think you see a multiple possession win in the divisional round.
Well, Ron, thanks so much for your time as always, and hopefully we'll be talking to you next week.
Yes, sir. I appreciate it, guys.
There he goes. That's lead analyst of Arrowhead Pride, Ron Kopp. That is the odd thing now.
You hit me with it. I mean, this could be it.
This could be it.
Don't say that to me.
We are going week to week at this point.
On. We don't want that.
I know you did. I didn't even think about it till I was on the way over here.
It's been such a nice time with you this year.
It's been a blast, even though the last 2 weeks have just been bad weather. Getting over here has been tough.
It's been tough.
But hopefully it's not the last week. And right now Vegas is indicating it won't be the last week because the Chiefs are heavy favorites in this game. And I do like the 27-17 prediction. It also wouldn't surprise me if we see something similar to what last year was with Miami, where the Dolphins just weren't equipped to play in that weather. They didn't match up well with Kansas City, and I think it was 26-7 when it was all said and done. That was a better Chiefs defense, in my opinion, a healthier Chiefs defense. But still, with Houston so depleted in the wide receiver room, I think it does bring up the question, how are they going to keep up offensively with Kansas City? And the Chiefs don't have a prolific offense, but they also have a very rested offense now, and an offensive line that has figured things out, and an offense, truthfully, that looked really damn good the last time these two faced off.
Yeah, I think the health is a huge factor. I mean, you're not even really all that used to Hollywood Brown being an option. It's wild because you saw the whole year, most of the year without him. And it wasn't always pretty. It wasn't the last time the Chiefs beat the Texans in the playoffs where they were able to go into that 51-7 run or whatever it was. So, I don't think they're looked at necessarily as an offense. For example, if you're trying to really think deeper into this, like that. And we'll get there, hopefully, right, Jack? Like that can compete with the Detroit Lions. But that being said, I don't know if we know exactly what this offense is right now with all these pieces. So let's wait and see. Maybe there is some kind of outburst coming up this Saturday.
Chiefs and Texans coming up this Saturday at 3:30. A chance for Patrick Mahomes once again to get back to the AFC title game at Arrowhead Stadium. We're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, we got Pete's 3 things to watch and some mailbag questions to get to. Look for Pete's tweet on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, or you can use our text line at 913-912-4810. You are listening to Arrowhead Pride Radio on Sports Radio 810 WHB.
Enjoying the show so far? Now it's time to get you involved. Text in your comments or questions to 913-912-4810, and we'll read and talk about it right now.
Wrapping up Arrowhead Pride Radio, which is brought to you by Heartland Financial and Mortgage. Check them out at hfmkc.com. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Pete Sweeney sitting across from me. Kyle Collier is producing this thing. And as we usually do for our third segment, we kick things off with Pete's 3 things to watch, and surprise, surprise, number 1 is going to center around left tackle. I feel like 2 weeks ago, we would have just said it's Joe Thuney, right? There's no reason to move Joe Thuney off that spot. But in typical Andy Reid fashion, he is keeping his cards close to his chest. He's not revealing much.
Right.
He's going to rotate these guys, DJ Humphries and Thuney, of course, all week long, and we probably won't know until warm-ups happen on Saturday afternoon. Is that the way it's probably going to go, Pete?
Yeah, it seems like he's not going to reveal this one. We pushed today in the media room, and he essentially said, I'm rotating these guys this week, and I'll try to figure it out. I think you got to go Thuney. That's just my opinion. I just think you have been able to see, and not to say that it was perfect, but you've been able to see that the offense had the most success of the season during the stretch when he was out there. Now, Andy Reid is going to stick to his guns. If he thinks that the team is in the best possible scenario, if DJ Humphries is out there with Thuney at his native position, he'll go and do that. Just don't know if you can go with an if when you have, not definitive, but I think you had your best look at the offense with Thuney in there. That's just my take on it. Doesn't mean it'll definitely go that way. We'll just have to see on Saturday.
I do wonder if they go Humphries, if there is that we're shattering the glass with the elbow.
Yeah.
If it goes wrong, you just say, okay, well, Thuney slide in there because he's done it before. Or
tough.
Is that too risky?
Like,
that too risky to do?
Like you look at some of these Chiefs games in the playoffs in recent years where they come down to one possession. And aside from the Chiefs, if you need something fresh in your memory, like look at the Bucs and the Commanders. That game at the end was about the clock. If there were 3 minutes left, maybe the Bucs would have won. If the Commanders had the lead when the time ran out. Like I don't know if you can waste a possession in the playoffs. So that I think gives me more confidence that it will be Thuney. But again, we are not there at practice every day. We're not seeing what they're seeing. So maybe they feel like DJ Humphries could be the answer.
On the defensive side of the ball, maybe the biggest question will be the health or maybe the snap count for somebody like Jalen Watson if he is out there.
Yeah.
Leave it up to Chiefs fans. I know that I've fallen victim to it before. You expect a lot from a guy, even if they've barely practiced or if they're slowly getting worked back in. Sometimes you just want them to look great in that first game back. But what should the expectation be for Jalen Watson if he is actually out there and he is active?
So I think I have an interesting take on this. And while it's good, I think, for him to get his wind back under him, and I think you'll see some kind of number of snaps for him, I don't think this is the game where you really need him. When you need him is going to be next week when you're playing potentially a team with a couple different pass catchers that really scare you a bit. In this game, if you look at the stat line from Texans-Chargers over the weekend, Nico Collins went off. 7 catches for 122 yards. The next yardage in the game was Hutchinson with 34, and it went down from there for the rest of the team. So the player that you're most worried about is Nico Collins, and guess what? Whether it's Jalen Watson or anybody else, that's not really going to be who he's focused on. That's going to belong to Trent McDuffie, and so you're curbing that anyway. So to me, and I know we're not trying to jinx anything here, but this is more about Jalen Watson getting back into the mix for what would be next week when I think you're really going to need him against one MVP or the other MVP, right? We have the MVP off happening this Sunday. We'll see who emerges, but to me, this week for Watson is about more so getting some snaps because they're going to really need to stretch him out, and would be an AFC title game.
Most teams at this point in the season, you can only have your fingers crossed and you are begging to have a clean bill of health going into the postseason. Some things you just can't control, especially for those that play in the wild card round. You have guys that can get banged up. But the Chiefs, with this 3-week layoff, or at least for the starters, they've been able to heal nearly everybody that had a chance of playing or just was banged up because of a 17-game schedule and that 3-game and 11-day stretch. What can you say about this health and maybe being the most healthy they've been all season long?
Yeah, I think we're looking at the Chiefs one way because they've been a certain way all year of still, like we saw last year, this grinded-out team that doesn't really blow anyone out, that impresses you offensively, but it's not like they go wild on the scoreboard and in that 2019 era just like putting up 30 points a game. But I look at this team, and I mentioned it earlier before, like, I don't really know if we know what this offense could truly be now that Hollywood Brown has gotten those games of getting his wind back under him, like I was just describing for Jalen Watson. You think about Xavier Worthy's emergence. You have playoff Travis Kelce now, which appeared to be a thing last year. DeAndre Hopkins. You also have Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco, who are both capable running backs. Then you're forgetting about the X factor that is Samaje Perine, and that could be this type of secret weapon that we've saw in previous years when it comes to Jerick McKinnon. And then you also have Justin Watson, who's in that mix. You have Juju Smith-Schuster. Hell, you have Noah Gray. You have a lot of healthy pass catchers that if Patrick Mahomes has enough time, we'll see what offensive line combination they put out there. But who knows? Maybe this offense that we really haven't seen together all year consistently on a week-to-week basis could do something like it did in 2019, where they are putting up 30 points a game in the playoffs. Like, I think it can be tight on Saturday. I think what we might be overlooking is this idea that the Chiefs could be one of these teams that looks far better than the Texans, like you maybe saw in that Bills-Broncos game. I think it's worth waiting to see what this thing looks like.
And last year, they didn't get that benefit of having the bye, but they played their best football of the season when it mattered most in January. Now you add on top of it, they've had 3 weeks to rest. You might see maybe the best version we've seen of the Chiefs in the last 2 years, considering the weapons they now have, and they're going to have home field throughout the postseason. Those are Pete's 3 things to watch ahead of the matchup with the Houston Texans on Saturday. Now it's time to get your thoughts and the questions that you sent in to Pete's Twitter about what you're thinking about between this matchup between Kansas City and Houston. Question number 1, how worried are you with the tackle play against their 2 elite edge rushers? It's the only disadvantage I see, and it's a terrifying one.
Yeah, it's a big concern. I mean, you think about Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson and what they're able to do when it comes to rushing the passer. And I think if there's one grand weakness in Kansas City, like I was mentioning before, it has been inconsistent tackle play, except during the stretch that they had Joe Thuney out there, again, in terms of pass protection. And so I am cautiously optimistic. I think more so than even a healthy line or having a choice at left tackle, there was a trend for Patrick Mahomes late in the year where they were getting rid of the ball under 2.5 seconds. And I think no matter what line you put out there, Mahomes is going to be capable of doing that. I actually talked to Tim about that today. He wants to get the ball in the hands of these pass catchers. And if you really look at the Chiefs, when in terms of Travis Kelce, more so earlier in his career and what we saw in last year's playoffs, and certainly Xavier Worthy, yak machines, and getting rid of the ball, getting them in open space, and kind of seeing what they do. Same thing can be said, I think, about Samaje Perine if he does have an expanded role in the postseason. And so I think that's going to be stressed all this week. I don't think you're always going to win every battle against these 2 great pass rushers, as our listener was describing, but I think a faster-paced offense can get the job done.
Question number 2, is the running game better with DJ and Thuney on the left side compared to Thuney and Caliendo? It seems like the running game productivity hasn't been the same.
Yeah, that's one of the things where I think you might be sacrificing with Thuney. And again, it's a shame because it's a little bit of a mystery box with DJ Humphries. All we know that, with Caliendo and Thuney, the run blocking has not been great, but I think it's more theoretical in terms of, well, let's just insert Humphries out there, and then it automatically is going to be better. I don't know if we know that, right? Like, because Humphries only got that first start where he had to leave early, and then it was a start where he was next to a lot of backups, and it was a tough product in terms of that, for Humphries. So I think they continue to just say, like, whatever is going to protect Patrick Mahomes the best, and if the run game suffers in that, the run game suffers. I think Andy Reid is the screen master, so you can kind of piece together a run game in that fashion. I keep mentioning Perine. I think he can do that. I think Hunt and Pacheco could have an impact in what would be a screen game. I think the Chiefs are going to want to try to establish the run, but it's not the lifeblood of the team. That certainly is Patrick Mahomes.
All right, question number 3 is in regard to Jalen Watson's usage. Does he become cornerback 2, or do you think he's eased in? And another part to this is, who is the slot corner if so? Do they keep Najee off the field so we don't have to close our eyes every passing down?
Yeah, I think they want it to be Shamari Connor in terms of the slot. I think if Jalen Watson is ready, It probably is a case where you see him on the outside. I think it'll be a rotation like we've seen for years and years. Ideally, they would want to have Jalen Watson be that 2 guy for the whole game, but I just don't think that's going to be in the cards. I think the Chiefs training staff is going to be smart about this because they're going to really need him, presumably, for next week. And so I think you see for him somewhere in the range of like that 20-25 area, 50% of the snaps. And yeah, I think you have that hope if you're Steve Spagnuolo that you don't need him more than that. Like maybe there will only be 50 or so defensive plays, and that'll be a good thing, and then you can get him out there for half the snaps.
And lastly, do you think Kareem Hunt should get the bulk of the carries? I feel like the run game was so much better with him over Isaiah Pacheco.
Well, Jack, I know you do, since you were talking to me about his overs before. But I think regardless of who gets the official start for the game, like I think sometimes Andy Reid will do this where he gives the go-to player, at least to start the year. In this year, it would be Isaiah Pacheco. Even if he starts the game, I think by the end of the game, you'll look at the stat line, and Kareem Hunt will have the most touches in the running back room. I think if there's a down you need and it's short yardage, to me, I think you got to go with Kareem at this point. We've just seen his ability to do it. And, I want to be clear here. I think part of some of the ineffectiveness of Isaiah Pacheco is he got injured this year. Like, he broke his leg this year. So I think the sky is still the limit for him once he regains his health and is able to actually work out and for 2025. But I think right here, right now, Hunt is the better option.
Again, those were all the questions sent in from the listeners. Thank you, as always, for looking out for Pete's tweet and giving us your thoughts and your questions out of such a pivotal matchup at Arrowhead Stadium, the AFC Divisional Round between the Chiefs and the Texans. Let's get our score predictions here in the final minutes of the show. Where do you go with here for this matchup on Saturday?
Yeah, I think this is a tough game to predict because I think there are a lot of versions of it. Like the one version that I'm certain doesn't exist is the Houston Texans blowing the Chiefs out. I mean, I hope I'm not jinxing anything when I say that. I just don't think that could potentially be in the cards, but I think a close Chiefs win, if you want to call it an upset, a close Texans win, and then a Chiefs blowout, as I was describing before with an offensive onslaught, is certainly in the cards. I'm going to be careful here. I think I'm in favor of a Chiefs 26-14 victory. I think the over-under is 42, and so I think to me that feels right for what is going into this game from a lot of different angles. I think the Texans are able to get on the scoreboard, but I think the Chiefs managed them, hit that Steve Spagnuolo goal of being under 17 points, and I think the Chiefs put up 26.
I think the biggest question for this game is how quickly will that start materialize, if you will. How hot is that start going to be for Kansas City? You can't come out flat in this one because the Texans understand they've got nothing to lose. They've made it further than people expect, kind of like what they had last year before going into Baltimore. They hung with the Ravens a little bit, and the Ravens completely blew them out in the second half. But if the Chiefs play with their food in the first half, in the first quarter, it's only going to build that confidence for a team like the Texans. And this is not a Chiefs team that wants to fall behind 14-0, 17-3, something like that, because as Pete brought up, it's not the same offense that we saw back in 2018, 2019, or even 2019, 2020, that overcame a 24-0 deficit, and not just the game, one quarter.
Yeah.
In fact, I think it was like 7 or 8 minutes. They overcame that 24-0 deficit at the hands of the Houston Texans. I think I'm going to go with 24-14 in this one. I feel like this offense will be polished up. I feel like they're not going to make too many mistakes in this one. And Houston, they had 3 turnovers in that game against the Chargers, and if it wasn't for the Chargers chargering, I think that Justin Herbert would have been able to take his team to Kansas City, and we would have felt a lot queasier about that matchup. Now, maybe let's real quickly talk about not Chiefs and Bills. Don't want to get there just yet. Ravens and
Freudian
Bills.
slip.
Yeah, don't want to have that clipped or anything and be exposed on cold takes. Ravens and Bills.
Yeah.
We asked Ron his thoughts. He feels like Baltimore's the better team. Where are you at when it comes to that?
I think Baltimore is the better team when you look at both sides of the football. I had mentioned going into the playoffs, the last 2 teams, this is obviously before the Broncos, but the last 2 teams the Bills had played, they gave up 40 points apiece to playoff teams. I know they had that AFC East stretch toward the end where they sort of recalibrated there, but I like Baltimore to put up a lot of points in this game, and I like their defense enough to hold Allen under that. And so I think Baltimore, I just did the same thing. I think Baltimore emerges from that game, and I think it's a better matchup for the Chiefs. So we'll see if the Ravens come to Arrowhead if everything goes right.
Yeah, it might bite me in the ass picking against Buffalo because we picked against them last week, at least not to cover against Denver. We had the Bills moving on.
We're wrong.
Yeah, I could be wrong on that one. It might be Chiefs and Bills. Who knows? It might be Texans and Bills or Texans and Ravens. That'll do it for another edition of Arrowhead Pride Radio on Sports Radio 810 WHB. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. That's Pete Sweeney. Kyle Colliard's been producing.
Yeah, thank you for listening to Arrowhead Pride Radio. It's brought to you by Heartland Financial and Mortgage, putting people first. Check them out at hfmkc.com.
From here on out, it'll be week to week. We might have a show next week. We might not. It all depends on the Chiefs, who kick off with the Texans at 3:30 on Saturday. Enjoy the game, and hopefully we do talk to you next week, Kansas City.
This has been another edition of Arrowhead Pride Radio. For much more, head to arrowheadpride.com and follow at Arrowhead Pride on social media.